This afternoon, I'm going to take you to a place that's cold enough to freeze your flesh in seconds, where polar bears lurk behind icebergs, waiting to jump out on unsuspecting adventurers, and where the biggest challenge of the day is just to stay alive, to survive. That place is the Arctic, a place that I never imagined I would ever get to. And yet, back in 1996 was the first time I was able to visit it. And it's around that idea of achieving things that we never imagined were possible that I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon. Because I believe that we all can achieve amazing things. And I've been really enjoying listening to the sessions over the last couple of days and hearing amazing success stories from those speakers. We can all do that. But I think the biggest thing that stops us is often ourselves and what's going on up here. In fact, my story begins back in Scotland when I was a wee girl reading adventure books. Now, I don't know if any of you used to enjoy reading adventure stories when you were young. Did anybody, hands up, anybody read The Famous Five, The Secret Seven, those great Enid Blyton books? I loved them. And I also read about real adventurers as well. But that began to fuel my imagination and think, wow, I'd just love to be an adventurer. But then I said to myself, well, seems to me, apart from those fictitious stories, when I read about real-life adventurers, they all seem to be men, and you must have to have an awful lot of money to do an expedition. So I began to believe it wasn't possible. And if you think back to Dr. Paul's talk yesterday afternoon, he talked about those limiting beliefs. And I truly believe, like him, that when you become aware of what beliefs you have that are holding you back, and then you choose to have a different belief, a more helpful one, you can achieve amazing things. So as I'm taking you on my journey this afternoon, which took me to the North Pole, I'd like you to think about your journey and what you want to be accomplishing in the future, and think about some of the points that I raise and how they're relevant, I hope, to your situation and what you might be able to achieve as you move forwards. As I said, it was back in 1996 that I became the first British woman to get to the magnetic North Pole. I was just pipped at the post because a couple of years earlier, a New Zealander, Helen Thayer, was the first woman in the world to get there. So you beat us to that particular location. But I never imagined that something like that was possible. Prior to that, I'd never been further north than Aberdeen in Scotland. I had never done any cross-country skiing, and I certainly had never experienced wearing the same clothes for an entire month. So that was a new experience, and perhaps one not to be repeated. Here's how our success was described on the news. I think they should have put subtitles up there, don't you think? So, what helps us to achieve things that we maybe don't imagine are possible? Well, I think it comes down to three things: vision, passion, and action. Now, you need all of those three things, because let me ask you a question. What do you think happens if you have your vision, your goal, your objective, and you've got all of that passion and enthusiasm, but you don't take any action? What's the outcome then? What happens? Nothing, exactly. We can probably get frustrated. We have great ideas, lots of enthusiasm, but we don't do anything. So what happens if we have passion and action, but no vision? Ever seen people running around being busy, but not making progress? And then lastly, if you have the vision and you have the action, but you lack the passion, what happens then? Particularly when the going gets tough. You give up, don't you? So that's why I think it's really important to have all of those three things. So I ask you now to do a little self-evaluation. I'd like you to think about these three things for yourself and think about how you would score them on a scale of 1 to 10. So if you think that you've got a really clear vision, you know exactly where you're heading, you would give yourself a score of 10. If you've got no idea what you're doing in terms of a vision, you'd give yourself a score of 1. And then similarly for passion and action. So I'd like you to write down or hold in your head 3 scores. 1 for vision, where you are currently in terms of the vision for the future. 1 for passion, how much passion have you got for that vision, if you have one? And then how much action are you taking? So a minute just to write down those 3 scores for yourself. This is your own self-assessment as a start point. So if you had a chance to think about it then, hands up who had the lowest score, if you had a low score, who had the lowest score for action? Okay, a few. Hands up who had the lowest score for passion? A lot of passion in the room, isn't there? Nobody put their hand up for that. Hands up who had their lowest score for vision? Okay, so it was a mix, I'm sort of seeing from here, a mix between vision and action in terms of the lowest score. And that for me is pretty common in terms of the groups that I speak to all around the world. Very often vision is the thing that people are lacking. They're doing lots of stuff and they're taking action, but they don't necessarily know where they're heading. And I'm also sensing here it's about, you might have those great ideas and you've got the passion, how do you put it into practice? So I hope over the next half an hour or so, I'll give you some ideas about how you can make that happen, building on some of the things you've already heard over the last couple of days. So the journey doesn't actually take us to the North Pole immediately. And that's the thing about striving for a grand vision, a big vision, whatever it might be that you want to achieve. It isn't necessarily easy and direct to get there. The route can be quite circuitous, and we can often think that we're never even going to get there. But if you hold that vision in your mind, it can help drive you in the longer term to where you want to be. So let me tell you why I've put this slide up here. As I mentioned, a wee girl in Scotland wanting to be doing something adventurous. That was as much of a vision as I had. Loved reading about adventure, wanted to be an adventurer. I left school at 16. I could have gone on to university and further studies. I chose to get myself a job, and I worked in the energy company British Gas in Scotland. And I was there in a company enjoying myself, and one day on the notice board at work, there was an advert to join or apply to be part of a charity, an expedition called Rally International. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. It's often called Operation Rally as well. And it used to take people from all around the world, aged between 17 and 24, for a 3-month expedition to a remote part of the world to carry out scientific, community and adventure projects. So here was this advert. The company was going to sponsor 5 employees to get 3 months off work to go on this adventure. You even got your salary paid. What's not to like about that? I thought, I'm going to apply for that immediately. And I thought loads of people would apply. And quite a number did. But we had to go through a whole series of selection tests. And the one phrase, and I always remember the abiding characteristic that the organisers were looking for in those applicants, cheerfulness in adversity. And I think that I can see that here, and I've heard the stories over the last couple of days from many of you about adverse situations that you've overcome and still have that cheerfulness. That's a watchword for me that I hold as I go through my life. Can I still be smiling, even although I'm facing tough times? Can I still get through that? Anyway, long story short, I managed to be one of the successful employees, got the 3 months off work, and I landed up in northern Kenya. This was way back in 1988, my first ever taste of an adventure. And it was a great learning opportunity to go there, work with people, young people like me from all around the world, and helping the local communities in northern Kenya there. But what I learned also was the idea about being resourceful. Because out there isn't a lot of equipment to build schools and houses and nurseries, etc. The resources are limited. And I learned that we had to be resourceful and adaptable to survive in that environment. Now, I'm preaching to the converted here, haven't I? Because you're all resourceful and able to manage to fashion a solution when perhaps you think you can't. That was my one big learning there. Adventure is about being resourceful and about being cheerful when things get tough. And it was about collecting these lessons and building confidence and experience that, unbeknown to me, was going to take me further towards my longer-term vision. So leaving Kenya, I got back to the company, and I was working there for many other years. Still have this vision in my mind. Do you relate to that, any of you? That you have a vision, a grand plan, but sometimes it doesn't come quite into fruition immediately, but you still hanker after doing it. So I still wanted to do something adventurous. And it took me until I'd worked in the company for 11 years to realize that perhaps British Gas wasn't the best place to be if you wanted to be an adventurer. And then one day, I was sitting on the train going up to London to a business meeting when I was reading the newspaper, and an advert caught my eye. It said, "Challenging opportunities for people not afraid of hard work in a rapidly changing environment." Now, you might think that sounds like a job in McDonald's. But it wasn't. This was an opportunity to go to the former Yugoslavia, as it was known at the time. A job, in fact, to go and work with the United Nations. And back in 1994, there was a war on then. So this was a job to be part of the United Nations and to help improve the efficiency of the organization over there. There were 3,000 civilians supporting 30,000 troops who were there to support the contingent, the people who lived in those countries and part of the former Yugoslavia. So it was about going there to make a difference. So I saw this advert. As you might see an advert or hear about an opportunity and you think, wow, that sounds amazing. But then I kind of thought about it. I saw it as an adventure. Here's an opportunity to have an adventure. What's not to like about going for a one-year contract in a war zone and working with people all around the world to make a difference? So I had that kind of naive enthusiasm, which we often get when we're faced with a new opportunity. And then I asked my family, what do you think I should do? They're like, are you nuts, Sue? Why would you leave a well-paid job with a company car and a nice lifestyle to go off and potentially get shot at in a war zone for a one-year contract? So I'm sure that you would do, like me, what we often do in those sorts of situations. I wrote down all the pros and I wrote down all the cons, all very logically. Do any of you do that? Yep. That's our kind of first way of often thinking about decision making. And then I use something that I think is often underutilized. Intuition. Gut feel. Do any of you use that to make decisions? And what generally happens? Do you get a positive result? Absolutely. And if you're not using it, I really encourage you to use more of your gut feel and your intuition. And my intuition said, go for it, Sue, this is an opportunity to take. So I did. And I remember standing there on that first day in Zagreb thinking, what have I done? You know, I'm really scared here, I'm really nervous. Have I made the right decision? But quickly I looked around, and as you can see here, I saw the remains of some of the houses burned down in the fighting. I saw the local people who were really struggling to survive in that situation. And I thought, whilst I'm here to have an adventure, I'm also here to make a difference. And that's really what drives me. Can I make a difference in what I'm doing? Well, it took me a year to realize that, well, yes, I can make a difference. And, but I wasn't making enough of a difference. So although I was there for all that time, I really felt that I wasn't being as productive as I could have been. So I left that job after 1 year, and I could have carried on and decided to come back to the UK. But what did I learn from that experience was about risk-taking. Stepping into the unknown, when there's a high degree of uncertainty, but having enough trust and belief in yourself that it'll work out no matter what. I had no job to come back to. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I said, you know what? If it's meant to be the right thing, I'm going to give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? I get shot at. I was prepared to accept that. So here I was, after that 1 year of experience. What do you think had happened to my level of confidence now about risk-taking? Had it gone up or had it gone down? Up, absolutely. And that's the thing. We heard it yesterday, small steps. I really encourage people to practice the art of risk-taking. Every single day. Just do one thing differently from what you did yesterday and see what happens. It can be having a conversation, speaking to somebody that maybe you didn't speak to yesterday. It can be anything, but just getting out our comfort zone, practicing being uncertain, because that's then when it becomes less scary when we do it more often. Anyway, I got back to the UK, and I decided I would go back and study at university, because I had missed out on that earlier in my life. And while I was doing that studying, I was again sitting in the garden reading the newspaper, which I like doing that. And then on this particular occasion, another advert caught my eye. This time, it said, "Are you man enough for the ultimate challenge?" And there was a picture and a story about they were looking for 10 novice Arctic explorers to ski to the magnetic North Pole. I thought, this is it. This is my chance to become a real proper adventurer, a chance to fulfill my vision. And there were 2 qualifications, not 3, there were 2 qualifications that they were looking for. The first was the ability to work in a team. So hands up, how many of you around the room here believe you can work in a team? Yeah, everyone can do that, can't they? And the second qualification was the ability to raise 30,000 New Zealand dollars to pay for their place on the expedition. Hands up who believes they could do that. So not quite so many hands. And it's all back, I think, well, A, if you want to do the expedition in the first place, but B, do you believe it's possible? I had absolutely no idea how to raise that sort of money. I probably could have bought a house at that amount of money back in 1996. I said to myself, if it's meant to be, I'll find a way. And I sent off for the application, and when it came back, it had the same phrase on it. Are you man enough for the ultimate challenge? And it was all pictures of men. What would you do in that situation? Perhaps you'd do like I did. How dare they think only men can do this? I'm going to show them that women can get on the team as well. And that's one of the things about risk-taking and stepping into the unknown, is sometimes you get more motivation from the people who say, nah, you'll never do that. And you go to yourself, I'll show you, I'll prove to you that I can do it. So think about how you're motivated. Encouragement and support is also very important, but some of you may be particularly motivated by those that are the naysayers. And if that's the case, then use that to your own advantage. Perhaps find those naysayers in some situations and use them as a motivation, a springboard for action. So I decided I would apply for the expedition, and the first thing for me was thinking about that vision. What's it going to be like at the North Pole? So imagine that for yourselves now. Imagine you were standing there, having skied for a month or longer, dragging a sledge, and you were at the North Pole. What do you think you would see when you got there? Any ideas? Snow and ice, of course, yeah. You won't see anything. There's just another bit of ice like anywhere else. So I began to imagine that, standing there in this white landscape. If I was with other people, which I was going to be, I might think about what would be the look on their faces. Would they be smiling? Would they be exhausted? So I began to visualize that. How do you think I might be feeling? Yeah, knackered. If you skied for a month, I would be pretty exhausted. So I began to think about what that would be like. And then I also began to think about what I might hear, what my colleagues might be saying to me. Well done, we've made it. What an effort we've put in. And that technique of imagining your vision, imagining into the future, what will you see, what will you hear, what will you feel, brings it alive in your imagination. And your brain doesn't distinguish between real things or imagined things. So the clearer you can create that vision about what you want, then your brain kind of says to itself, oh, okay, we've done it then. I know what it's like. And it will then start to look for those things to become reality. So I really encourage people to use that idea of visualization. Start to really get clear about what your vision looks like, sounds like, and feels like. Well, I didn't even know, to be honest, where the magnetic North Pole was. I knew it was somewhere cold and in the Arctic. And here it's where it is, about 500 miles away, or what would that be in kilometers? 750 or something like that? Kilometers away from the geographical North Pole, which is the top of the world. So here's if we looked at an atlas, right at the top would be the geographical pole, the magnetic North Pole's here. And it actually moves in 10 kilometers in a northwesterly direction every year. So if you and I all went there now, we would go to a different place than where I was in 1996. And it's where all the Earth's magnetic fields come into at the top of the world. I didn't know any of this. I had to learn it before I went there. So understand what the reality is of what your vision is about and where you're heading. Anyway, on we go. You've got these organisers that put the trip together, and they were going to select this team of 10 novices. So what qualities do you think you would look for if you were going to select a team of people to take into a place that wants you dead? What do you think? Just let's hear any ideas. Trustworthy, yep. Oh, physically fit, yes, absolutely. Got to be fit, you've got to be trustworthy. Determined, you've got to be determined. Positive, yeah. Have definitely a sense of humour. Now, all the things that you've said, equally I'm sure apply in your world as well. We can teach people skills, but what we can't teach them is attitude. And that's what you really need when you're going to trust your teammates to go into such an extreme environment. So loads of people applied, and we had to go through a whole series of selection tests. So think about what you do to find the right people for the people you need in your team. We did a military assault course. We did some psychometric tests to see if we were mentally stable. We did some other different tests as a team together. And eventually the 10 of us were selected. 8 men and 2 women. Myself and a woman from Sweden called Susanna, who was living and working in the UK at the time. They all came from different backgrounds, but the one thing they had in common was that desire to achieve the outcome. So how do you find people with passion and purpose and energy to help support you to achieve your vision? Well, the journey doesn't even begin, of course. Even although I found out I was in the team, I still had this huge obstacle of fundraising. Now, I've heard lots of talk in the sessions over the last couple of days about business planning, managing budgets, cash flow, etc. So I'm sure that finances is something that's on top of your minds as well. Am I right? Money's important? Yeah, absolutely. So I wasn't going to get a place in this team if I didn't have the money raised. So I had to be creative about how I went about finding it. So I wrote to all the companies, I wrote to all my friends and family, because I had to raise £15,000, which is about £30,000 New Zealand dollars. And most people, apart from my friends and family who said, well done, but we haven't got any money, we can't support you, most people didn't even reply. But I said to myself, if it's meant to be, I'll find a way, I'll make it happen. And eventually, I thought about writing to Bird's Eye Frozen Foods Company. Do you have that in New Zealand? No? There's a company that makes frozen fish fingers. So I thought there'd be a good bet to start off with. So I wrote to them, and they were one of the few companies, well, the only company, to be honest, that actually even replied to my letter. Now, like all of you, when you've got a plan or objective or a goal, you need to have a good business case, don't you, to convince the bank or whoever it might be that's funding you. Well, there was lots of people wanting funding from companies for good causes, so I had to have a good business case. Why would they support me? 2 reasons. We had the BBC filming us on the expedition, so the sponsors or whoever was investing in it would get some media coverage, hopefully. And secondly, I discovered that if successful, I'd be the first British woman to get there. So hopefully that would get a bit of coverage on the media. So it's about finding those arguments, convincing not only yourself, but your potential sponsors. Eventually, Bird's Eye said, yes, we'll pay the whole amount of money, which was amazing. But they don't give out money for nothing. So I had to eat fish fingers for the rest of my life. No, sorry. What I had to do was go and speak at some schools after I'd finished the expedition, regardless of whether we were successful, and talk to them about the Arctic, and we had a Bird's Eye education pack. So they were supporting the education of young children about the Arctic. I want to get on to talking about preparation, though. Preparation for achieving that big goal, whatever it is that you want to do. 3 ways of preparation we had to do. We had to prepare ourselves for the environment. Now, I don't know if this situation applies equally to you, but if you're starting to try a new project, sometimes you can't afford to experiment beforehand. I couldn't fly to the Arctic to see what it was like in -20. We had to find another way of preparing to think about what that environment was like. So we went actually into the freezer in Smithfield Meat Market in London. And there was a big freezer, and we took in all our Arctic equipment, set the temperature to -20, and simulated what that environment was like. So sometimes when you've got that vision and that idea, how do you get practice, how do you get experience and knowledge in other areas that you can bring to your project? The second thing we had to do was prepare our bodies physically to cope with those cold temperatures. So I had the best Christmas ever, knowing it was okay to overindulge and eat lots of food to put on a little bit of extra weight. But lastly, and more importantly, was preparing yourself mentally. So we did a what-if list, and I heard what ifs being talked about yesterday. So we all got in the pub one night, the team of us, and we said, well, we all wrote down our what-ifs, our fears and concerns. What if we fall through the ice? What if we meet a polar bear? What if I can't stand my teammates? You know, what if things go wrong? Who will rescue us? What if somebody gets ill? And although we didn't necessarily answer all the questions, by sharing those fears and concerns, somehow they weren't so scary after all. And I'm sure that's what a network like this is really great for, to have that support around you, to share those fears and concerns, to express them. And then you suddenly realize you're not the only person that's got those fears. Somehow they're not so scary. So that was what we did to prepare ourselves mentally. And then the journey began. As your journey is either already beginning or will in the future. Thinking about, this is starting off from our start point Resolute in in the Nunavut territories of northern Canada. Starting off and knowing we're going to be skiing 550 or so kilometers ahead of us, with nothing else between us and the North Pole. Everything you need to survive in those sledges. That's when that ability to be resourceful comes in again. But not only that, you've got to trust those around you with your life. And that's where you really need to ensure, I found, that you do get on with those people. Not necessarily forever, but for that period of time you're working with them on a particular expedition. Now, it would have been pretty foolish to go into the Arctic with 10 novices who'd never been there before and expect us to survive and to be successful. So we need to have some good leadership. And in our case, it was this chap on the slide, David Hempelman Adams. He's a well-known British polar explorer. It was his idea to put the expedition together, to bring people who'd never been to that environment before and to see how they would get on and whether they could survive. Now, David, with all of his years of expertise, could have said, right, I know everything about the Arctic, you lot know nothing, ski behind me, and after 30 days or so we'll get there. Do you think that would have been motivating for us? Absolutely not. And if something had gone wrong, we would have blamed him. Well, he told us to do that, it's not our fault. That wouldn't have really been very effective as a leader's approach to it. I thought he really used a very effective approach. What he did is he divided us up into smaller groups. One experienced person, and 3 novices together, and we were in small groups. And we all shared, in those groups of 4, we shared a tent together. So on the first day, after the first couple of days where he had led and showed us what to do, he said, right, okay, tent A, you're in charge of navigation today. He gave us the compass, which we weren't able to use because we were heading to the magnetic pole. A compass will go round and round, and it's pointless. But he gave us the compass nevertheless. He gave us a GPS, and this was in early days of sat-nav, but a GPS works on batteries, and in minus 20 degrees, it's going to use its batteries up really quickly. So you can't use your GPS all the time. And he also gave us the map. He said, right, you plan how far we're going, which direction we're heading in. So you can imagine Group A inside their tents. Right, okay, well, this is the way we'll go. Now we'll start off quite quick, and we'll get everyone to move along with us, and then when they get tired, we'll maybe encourage them. And that's what their plan was, and they enacted that. At the end of the day, David said to them, fantastic team A, you've done a brilliant job. We've skied 14 miles. So I'm now doing my calculations, what's about 18 kilometers, something like that. Well done. What did he do next day? Team B. Okay, tent B, you've got the same job. So what do you think tent B said? We're going to beat tent A, we're going to do faster. And then the next day, of course, team C, what's your plan? He introduced what I would call co-opetition. So it's a mixture between competition and collaboration. Because people did share their strategies, they learned from one another, but there was also that little bit of competition encouraging high performance. And of course, he was there at the back in case there was any really dangerous situation, health and safety, any other particular problem, he would step in there. But I thought that that was a really great way to lead us because it encouraged and empowered us to learn and think for ourselves, even in an environment that's high risk like that. But it doesn't all go smoothly. Of course, you make mistakes, things go wrong. It will happen to everybody. And you can see here, it's pretty difficult to learn how to cross-country ski and go over these hills and down over uncertain terrain. So we all made mistakes as we went along. And it was interesting to see how the difference between the men and the women coped with the situation, the challenging environment. The first few days, you ski along, and if you ask one of the men, how are you getting on today? Are you feeling tired? No, absolutely fine. Say, yeah, right. I'd ask Susanna, and she would say, no, I'm quite tired. Then 3 or 4 days later, when the men realized that they didn't have to put on a show, they didn't have to prove themselves to anybody, then they would admit their weaknesses and their flaws and their vulnerabilities too. And at the end of the expedition, the men said, actually, we really liked having women in the team because it made the environment much different. And they felt that it wasn't so macho and competitive for them. But it's just interesting, regardless whether you're a man or a woman, how do you create that environment when you're setting yourself up for a challenging goal that people can just be open and honest and be themselves? And that's what it took a little while in our team to do that. As we went along then, you can imagine you're skiing hour by hour, day by day, in complete white. Nothing to focus on, nothing to motivate you. All the environment looks exactly the same. So all the challenges are really going on in your head. And that might be the same for you, where you have a lot of things that you're focusing on, but what really is the obstacles are the things that are happening up here. And it's how you then motivate yourself in that situation. I'll give you an example. After about 11 days of skiing, we were checking our progress, and we realized if we continued at the same speed that we had been doing, which was 22 kilometers by that stage, we would run out of food before we got to the end of the expedition, to the North Pole. And yet, we thought we were at our physical limit already. Do you ever feel like that? And you think, well, how can I do this? You know, they've asked me to do this, something extra, problems happened, how am I going to cope with it? And what we realized was we had to reframe our thinking. Up until that point, we'd had a routine. We would ski for an hour, we'd have a 5-minute break, we'd have another hour of skiing, another 5-minute break. That was our routine for the day. No stopping for lunch or anything else. And that resulted in 22 kilometers. So what we said to ourselves is, let's ski for an hour and a quarter a day. But rather than looking at hours, we'll look at sessions, if you get my sense here. Because we could ski for 8 sessions. We knew we could do 8 sessions in the day. We made the sessions longer, and we stopped thinking about time. So when you got to that 7th session of the day, rather than saying, oh, we've still got an hour and a half to go, or whatever it was, you knew you could just had one more session. So think about that when you're facing those challenges heading towards your vision. How can you reframe your thinking and perhaps look at the problem from a different perspective? As I mentioned, the terrain wasn't straightforward, and we were measuring our progress as we went along. But there were 3 things that I think really can help people to be successful, as well as vision, passion, and action. I think it requires us to think about, in those tough times, what are the strengths that have got us here in the first place. So I wonder if you think about that for yourselves. What would be that number 1 strength you would say has got you to where you are today? I really encourage you to think about that and just use that as a motivator for yourself. Perhaps the more difficult question is question number 2. What are you going to stop doing? If you want to achieve that vision, that challenging goal, it's often as hard to think about what you're going to stop doing, to find space, to invest in yourself, to make time to achieve what you want to achieve. And then lastly, what are you going to add or develop? I work a lot with people and coaching them, mentoring them to help them achieve their goals. And I always ask them those 3 questions before we start, even working with them. I always say, tell me the strengths you've got that have brought you here today to where you are. Now, what are you going to stop doing so you can make time for this coaching? And normally people can answer that question pretty easily. There was one guy I worked with, we never even got into the coaching sessions because he just said, well, I don't know, I haven't got time for this coaching, I don't know what I'm going to stop. I said, well, when you do know, when you've worked that out, come back to me. And it was about 6 months later he came back. So I really think that's the tough question to ask yourself. And then lastly, once you've made that space, what are you going to add or develop to help you achieve your vision? The other thing that helped us and our team was about having rewards as we went along. Do you reward yourself as you go through the day? No. You wait until you've achieved that goal, got the result done. I'm a great fan of having regular sort of motivators or things just to reward you as you go along that will give you a sense of encouragement. And for me, normally that reward involves food. So yes, I'll get that thing done and then I'll have something to eat. And that motivates me. And it's the same on expedition. I just think also, yes, it's important to reward ourselves when we've achieved success. Don't forget to reward yourself, to motivate yourself as you go through. Now, the expedition, it did in the end take us 30 days to get to that point. And it was a lot of highs, a lot of lows, a lot of challenges. But we ended up being successful. However, the journey doesn't end necessarily here in my story today, because I don't think that happens in life. We don't always have happy endings, and then that's the end of things. After the great highs that we have, what often comes next? It's the low, and it's how do we cope with those times that really help us to take the next challenge and face it head on. So after I got back from that North Pole expedition, we'd had a lot of television coverage, etc. I thought, wow, I'm going to be famous. I could just sit back and job opportunities will come my way, you know, things will happen. Rubbish. Well, of course, you know, we were front page news for a day, and then you're just old news. You're the next day's chip wrapping, as they would say in Britain. So I sat back and I waited. I waited not only a week, not only a month, I waited 3 months for somebody to do something for me. And all of that confidence that I'd had at the North Pole had now disappeared. And I said to myself, do you know what, Sue? The only person that's going to help you is you. You've got to get back out there and do something. So I remembered this Rally International, this charity that I'd been to Kenya with. I remembered they always need volunteer members of staff to help them on their expeditions. So I thought, maybe if I go back and volunteer my services, my knowledge and experience to help other people achieve their expedition dreams, maybe that will help to motivate me. So I rang them up and they said, yes, Sue. We said, you've got some, lots of knowledge and experience now. We need somebody to be deputy expedition leader in Chile. In 3 weeks' time, the expedition starts. Would you like to go down to Chile and lead a group of 120 young people down there? I said, yeah, fantastic. If I can help them have a similar experience to me, I'm up for that. So I arrived down in Chile. If you've ever been to Chile or seen pictures of Chile, you'll know in the south of Chile, it looks a little bit like this. Doesn't that look a little bit like the Arctic? I thought, wow, well, here I am, almost at the other end of the world now, a few months later. I wonder, somehow, some way, could I get down to Antarctica? So once you've achieved one thing, you set your sights higher, you set the next goal. So while I was down there, I was writing, my sister and I were corresponding, it was in the old days before email, and in one of her letters, she wrote to me, and she enclosed a newspaper cutting, talking about a guy called Robert Swan, who was the first man to walk to both the North Pole and the South Pole. This was an expedition he was organizing to go down to Antarctica, taking 35 young people from 25 countries, and they were going to go down there and be inspired by experiencing Antarctica for themselves. They were looking for these young people, and this was the advert from the newspaper in Scotland. She said, ha, Sue, you're far too old now. You're not going to be able to be part of this expedition because you're over 24 years old. But it's at moments like that where the opportunities are. I thought, well, He's going to need extra members of staff, isn't he? I'm going to write to him, and he doesn't know who I am. I'll find out his address, his contact details, and I'm going to write to him and see if I can help on that expedition. So sure enough, I wrote the letter. A few weeks later, I got a message back in Chile, yes, we'd love you to come down to Antarctica and to be part of this trip. I thought to myself, wow, this is too good to be true. This is a miracle. And when I met Robert, he said, don't be stupid, Sue. He said, it's not a miracle. He said, there were two good reasons why we picked you to join our team. He said, the first reason is this was a United Nations expedition, well, a UNESCO expedition, which is part of the United Nations. And you had United Nations on your resume, so we thought that would be relevant. And secondly, unknown to me, one of the guys on our North Pole expedition was also on this trip, and he provided a recommendation. That point I really want to make to you this afternoon is you just don't know where opportunities are going to come from. And unless you take that first step to see what's possible, you'll never realize what amazing things you can also achieve in your journey going through. I never would have got to the North Pole and Antarctica had I not taken that first step to leave British Gas. So it's a series of small steps. Back to those three areas. Make sure you've got a clear vision. You know where you're heading. Don't forget to have that passion so that when things get tough, you'll not give up. But lastly, make sure that you take some action. So the last thing I want to say this afternoon is, how do you take that action then? I'd like to fast forward you now 12 months from today. Imagine we're sitting here in May 2020. The world's going to be a different place. You might be in a different place. You might even have a different haircut. Who knows? The world will be in a different place. So I want you to think about what you will have learned 12 months from now. Where do you want to be? And in a moment or two, as you'll see on the table in front of you, there's a letter to yourself to write about where you want to be, not just in 12 months, but 3 months as a stepping stone towards that. I would say that change isn't always easy. We might deny it first of all and say, oh, that's not possible. We might resist it. But why not just give it a try? Just take one decision today to do one small action that will take you forward and commit yourself to what you want to do for the future. So if there's nothing else that you take away from this afternoon's talk from me, I would say, don't forget to read the newspaper. Thank you very much.